and then gave them domain and authority over every living creature. That was the authority given. Unfortunately, Adam and Eve lost it. And of course, Christ Jesus won that back for us on the cross of Calvary. But between the historical lineage and chronology of the Bible, there are some amazing instances about how and how not to treat employees, workers, in terms of the wages, so on and so forth. There are entire Levitical chapters focused on how we need to treat workers. In fact, the whole concept of the Sabbath as the rest day also has a biblical plus an employment connotation. And the history of humanity also shows us that we as communities have always moved from place to place. Whether it was Joseph, who was by force sent into Egypt, which finally ensured that a whole community of Israelites were in Egypt, the big exodus or the migration that took place, followed by the exodus of 2 million people under the able leadership of Moses. God also talks about the Levitical commandments of treating workers fairly. In Leviticus 19:13, we see that God commands that you shall not defraud your neighbor, you should not steal, and finally, most importantly, you shall not keep for yourself the wages of a laborer until morning. In other words, the daily wages to be given to every worker according to the promise that had been made to him or her. Now, ironically, over time, we seem to have forgotten the biblical connotation and the significance of treating workers. In fact, Bible even goes to the extent of calling them neighbors. So you got to treat them as a good neighbor, as an employee. An employee is like a good neighbor. Of course, there are some companies that follow it and many companies that don't. So the whole idea behind taking care of the welfare of employees, taking care of their wages, providing them immediate payment is continuously alluded to in many different biblical passages, including in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 14 to 15, where it talks about day laborers who need to be paid at the close of every single day. In the New Testament, there's a fascinating passage where Jesus Christ talks about a particular parable. He speaks about somebody being employed from morning 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And then there is somebody who is taken in at a later stage during the day. And when the payment is given, it's given for both of them together at the same cost. And of course, the men who worked right from the morning were very upset with this. And when they ask, Christ puts a very exciting paradigm of how equity and fairness has to be part and parcel of life. You know, this is so interesting that in all of God's creations, there is this concept of biological urge and need for what we call equity, fairness, and justice. I mean, as a professor, I'd like to share with you a fascinating scientific research that was done a few years back. This was by Professor Sarah Brosnan from the University of New York, State University of New York. And what she did was she had two capuchin monkeys. These were typical monkeys who were kept in cages. And between these two monkeys, what she did was she made them do little errands. And these errands were like picking up a rock and giving it to the professor. And for one monkey, she gave that monkey, the capuchin monkey, cucumbers. And for the other monkey, she gave grapes. The job was the same, but in this case, the wages, quote unquote, for the monkeys was different. And in the monkey scheme of things, grapes is a higher wages in comparison to cucumber. Now, you've got to see this video. You can see it on, on YouTube. When you see that it's a fairness experiment, capuchin monkeys, you'll find this fascinating video where the moment you give cucumbers to both, they're both happy. But when you give cucumber to one and when you give grapes to the other, the monkey that gets the cucumber virtually throws the cucumber back at the professor. And the interesting part is this is not a stray incident. This is something that has happened across different animals. They've tried it with dogs. They've tried it with pigeons. They've tried it with other species of monkeys. So the big lesson that I'm trying to impart from this is that if this is the kind of equity and fairness biologically hardwired into animals, imagine what should be done when we talk about treating employees, treating workers. Now, here's the good news and the bad news. Right from the time when the Israelites moved to Egypt and then back from Egypt on the massive exodus to the promised land, I think mankind has had this mobility as an exciting proposition as well as a challenging proposition. And over time, what has happened is that unscrupulous human beings, greedy agents, and people in the middle have completely masqueraded as do-gooders, but have actually done more harm than good towards global mobility, global employment, and global workers' rights. So this has become a common cause for everybody to be concerned about. In fact, some of you may be aware there are nightmare stories of people being promised the moon and not being given what they deserve. And of course, from a biblical perspective, it's completely wrong, as we see by a number of verses in the Bible which tell us that we need to provide for them. In fact, there's a fascinating passage in the New Testament where Paul writes, there are many books he has written. One of them is a book called Philemon. And in the book Philemon, it's a very little book in the Bible, in the New Testament, where we meet an employee called Onesimus. And Onesimus has been thrown out by his employer because Onesimus actually did a little bit of stealing. In some way, he had stolen from his employer. That's Philemon. And Paul is saying, hey, it might be a good idea to take him back. Not because Onesimus has really changed his ways, but that Onesimus should be not viewed as an employee who has erred or made a mistake, but as a brother who needs to be forgiven. And that, I think, is a very important perspective on how we look at the concept of workers, the concept of labor, the concept of migration, the concept of wages and equity. Psalm 139, 23, 24 encourages us to ask God to shine his spotlight on our hearts and the motives that we have. So as human beings, the capitalistic model perpetuated, unfortunately, by people like Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman, who did more harm than good, created a kind of focus that it's all about making money at the cost of crushing employees, at the cost of crushing customers and other stakeholders. But thankfully, there's a new realization, there's a new revolution, and there's a new movement that is coming towards. And I think we're all answerable. Like the psalmist said, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. And probably that's a very important thing for all of us. Proverbs 3:27 says, do not withhold good from those to whom it's due when it is in your power to act. So I think there's a mandate for all employees across the world, corporates across the world, institutions across the world, and people like us who are in between to do our best to ensure that equity, fairness, justice, and workers' rights, legitimate rights, are taken care of. Now the bad news. Over time, we have seen that this has been a tremendous exploitation of people. They're taken in with big promises by unscrupulous agents who charge them mountain loads of agency commissions, and then take them to a job which they may not like. And this is where the context sets. So biblically, we are required to even treat our employees like neighbors. We are supposed to forgive and give them that fairness, equity, and justice. We are supposed to respect them for what they are. And I think that is the big lesson that comes out from a biblical perspective. I now want to introduce you to what this value proposition is for you as pastors, as men of God, people who are now responsible, not just for the spiritual welfare of our people, but equally their physical welfare, their emotional welfare, their financial welfare, so on and so forth. And I think there's a big lesson for us, a big responsibility for us, and the good news. The bad news, as I said, is total exploitation. But the good news is that there is a legitimate agency that is willing to give an absolute blessing to the hundreds of thousands of labor, migrant workers, and employees across the world who are looking for a brighter future but tend to get exploited by the unscrupulous elements, Joblio takes it as its moral and ethical responsibility to ensure there's a fair, just world where an employee who's a carpenter gets employed as a carpenter, gets his due wages as a carpenter, gets his legitimate rights in another unknown country. It could be Europe, it could be North America, it could be any part of the world, maybe Middle East, but without any exploitation. And the best part is the employee pays nothing towards this service. He or she probably bears the flight charges and probably the visa charges. Apart from that, there is no commissions to be paid to any unscrupulous agent. The whole work is done through a technology-backed, AI-enabled app, which I will allow my colleague. I work for Joblio as an advisor. I'm on their board. And so it's my privilege to take this opportunity to introduce to you Mr. Jon Purizhansky, the CEO founder of Joblio, a very lofty, many of you know me as a servant of God, as a part-time preacher. And of course, I work among a lot of communities, including youngsters. So I want to introduce you to what Jon has to say. He comes from a very strong Jewish background. And the interesting part is that Joblio, which is driven by these amazing human beings, more than their backgrounds as UN professionals or migrant lawyers, is that they're driven by legitimate human beings with very strong values. And the most interesting good news, which you may have seen on the poster, is that Joblio is now partnered with the international evangelical community, which is about across 90 countries with millions of evangelical Christians partnering with Joblio on this massive mandate of making the world a better place, with giving everybody an opportunity without exploitation and providing them the legitimate rights as designed and destined by the word of God in his holy Bible. So without much ado, permit me to introduce Mr. Jon Purizhansky, founder CEO of Joblio, who would probably share more insights on how this value proposition works and how this works most specifically for the churches who will be involved in this noble cause. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor. It's a true privilege to be with you and to present Joblio to you. And indeed, as Professor Abraham mentioned, well, Joblio is a private company. Our business model is built around protecting the workers' right, and also, as Professor mentioned, Deuteronomy 24:14, where it says, "You shall not abuse a needy and destitute laborer, but you must pay him his wages on the same day, for he is needy and urgently depends on it." And then a similar statement appears in Leviticus, where it says, "You shall not defraud your neighbor or rob him. The wages of he who is hired shall not remain with you all night until the morning." So Joblio has been created to protect the laborers who may be defrauded, and to ensure that the needy and destitute laborer does get paid accordingly. And of course, Professor mentioned my Jewish background, and just very briefly, unfortunately, the Jewish people who've traveled, who've been migrants from before Exodus, and then through living in Egypt, and then returning back to the land, and then being dispersed amongst the nations and being prohibited from participating in certain professions, and now who have gathered and are still gathering in the land of Israel, which is a sign of better things to come. So nobody knows better than the Jews what it's like to be deprived of wages by somebody who is more powerful than yourself. So what Joblio does is Joblio is a social impact platform that brings light, compliance, and transparency into probably the darkest industry in the world, which is the industry of human labor migration. So, what is the industry of human labor migration? The International Organization for Migration, the IOM, estimates that in 2018 there were close to 300 million labor migrants in the world. However, in reality, this number is likely to be 3 or 4 times higher because for many reasons, different countries don't release data, and also the intracontinental migrations, such as the migrations from Bolivia into Chile, or from Congo into Rwanda, or from Burma into India, are simply not accounted for. As we all know, vast majority of labor migrants originate from rural or remote areas of the developing world, while vast majority of their employers are domiciled in the developed world, primarily in the European Union, Japan, the GCC region, as well as North America and other British Commonwealth countries, Cyprus, Israel, South Korea. What happens is, while a more sophisticated, educated labor migrant, prospective labor migrant, I should say, meaning that if you're a doctor, if you're an engineer, or if you're a highly educated professional, you are likely to be able to figure this out by yourself. Meaning you're going to find work in another country and you're going to figure out how to get, the process of getting the work visa and the work permit and the relocation, because you have the sophistication to do it. While the unskilled or low-skilled prospective labor migrants, who make up 90% of the migratory workforce in the world, are simply unable to either secure employment or to process themselves for the appropriate immigration documentation that will enable them to compliantly work in a foreign country, which is why for hundreds and thousands of years they have retained services of the so-called labor agents and labor brokers and various middlemen, irrespective of whether the labor migrant who lives in India or in Africa or in Latin America or in one of the post-Soviet countries, the likelihood that this prospective migrant is going to be engaging a middleman to find him or her work abroad is very, very high. So now let me take a step back and put some color on the totality of circumstances that the journey is based on. Basically, since World War II, really, the developed world, particularly the European Union and Japan, have aged and have built generational wealth. So they've been having one kid per family in Europe for the last 70 years. Their population is shrinking, and in parallel to this, they get paid the life insurance payments, and they enjoy savings from previous generations, which has resulted in them meaning citizens of the developed world, simply not having the need to perform the same sort of work that their grandparents used to. So if you live in Norway and you're a Norwegian, maybe your grandfather used to go into the Arctic Ocean on a fishing boat, but you no longer are willing to do that type of work because it's too hard. Similarly, if you live in Sicily in Italy, you don't want to go picking, oranges because you just don't have to. In the United Kingdom, 2 months ago, due to a critically severe shortage of truck drivers, the British Army had to deploy 100,000 soldiers to drive trucks. There is a shortage of close to 1 million caregivers alone in Germany. Poland which is a vibrant economy that's based on agriculture, has been losing its population to its Western neighbors in the EU. For every 3 Polish nationals who leave Poland, only 2 return, and is bringing in millions, literally millions of labor migrants all the time. Romania and Hungary and Czech Republic are similarly situated to Poland. So now let's say that you are an employer in Poland and you need 10,000 people to come in for the season, because Poland is, I think, the biggest exporter of apples in the world, and you need unskilled workers to come in to work for you for 6 months to separate green apples from red apples. Now you are Polish and you live in Poland, and now you realize that you need to bring these people, but how do you find them? So the often naive when it comes to, the global village European employer typically will ask his or her HR manager that, hey, go find me 1,000 unskilled workers. But because they don't exist, for the reasons that I just explained, now the HR manager is having difficulties finding them. And then the HR manager hires or retains services of an employment agency locally, which is also naive because it's a Polish employment agency or a German one or a Canadian one, okay? And now the employment agency starts advertising in local press and on Facebook, and is also unable to find the staff domestically for a simple reason: it does not exist. Ultimately, the employment agency, which for all intent and purpose becomes middleman number 1, is forced to venture outside of its ecosystem or its comfort zone, meaning that they are now beginning to employ agents in the developing world to find staff. And when the first agent appears, let's say from India, this agent is already removed from the employer by at least 2 other brokers. Now, this agent is not necessarily a manpower company, because this agent is just someone familiar, somebody who knows somebody in Poland. And now this agent is forced to go and look within India. So maybe the agent lives in Mumbai, but he has a cousin in Gujarat, and the cousin lives in the village, and he calls him and he says that, hey, can you find me 100 boys to go to Poland to work for a farm? Now think about how many hands the information just passed. The information was just passed through 4, 5, 6, 7 hands, and who knows if it's truthful? Who knows if it had been intentionally, made to appear more attractive or not, so that the final sub-agent in the village is able to charge more money from the naive and unsophisticated labor migrant who has no other means to find work abroad and move up socially, otherwise than having to pay someone. The reason the reason that a lot of human tragedy exists in this world is because employers are not connected to employees. This is a huge problem. Don't forget that almost all human trafficking in the world begins with a job advertisement, right? So now, while the developed world has aged and has become wealthy, the developing world today continues to make many babies per family, and there are no jobs that these babies can occupy the job positions when they turn 18, because economies are weak. That's why you have this organic movement of people that we have witnessed recently, and are certainly more exposed to than before because of the internet. However, it is also because of the internet that we all have one of these things in our pocket. Proliferation of smartphone technology has been immense. Almost 90% of citizens of Southeast Asian countries today possess a smartphone device. old refurbished Chinese Android phones sell for as little as $1 and $2. So they are affordable. Sub-Saharan Africa, I believe in 2018, 40% of Sub-Saharan Africa owned a smartphone device. With the smartphone comes transparency and direct connectivity. So let's take a step back and talk about the middleman again. The middleman presents an informational barrier, erects an informational barrier between the employer and the employee, because the middleman's business model depends on that informational barrier. Additionally, the middleman does not know the truth, because the middleman is in the village in Gujarat or in some village in Kenya, in Africa, or in Vietnam, or in Venezuela. And the middleman doesn't really know if what he or she is selling is the truth, which is why this is statistics of the International Labor Organization. Close to 70% of newly arrived labor migrants ran away from their employers in Europe within the first 90 days. So why does that happen? And many of you are located in the developing countries, so you may know this firsthand. Of course, if you live in Nepal and now you have an opportunity, the labor agent or the middleman is trying to sell you the opportunity to go to Poland. Now the middleman is asking you to pay him $10 or $15 or $20,000 that you don't have. It's a fortune of money. Therefore, you end up borrowing the money and going into debt. So now you borrow the money. Maybe you borrow the money from your family members, or maybe you borrow the money against your real estate, or maybe you borrow the money from the bad people. And when you borrow the money, you build math inside your head. You're thinking, okay, I was told that I'm going to go to Poland. I'm going to make $3,000 per month. And I'm okay to borrow 15,000 because I'm going to pay it back in 5 months. And then everything I'm going to make is I'm going to send back home, and my family is going to experience this hockey stick looking upward social mobility, because we're going to paint our house, buy bicycles for the kids, start eating better. And now you show up in Poland and you've borrowed the money, and you show up in Poland and you go to work, and you realize that the employer has different expectations, because you were never told that the employer expects you to be a professional painter. You were told that you're coming as a helper. So now your employer is angry at you. That's A. And B, once the wage time comes, now all of a sudden, instead of $3,000, you realize that you only made $800. So now you are not going to be able to pay back the $15,000 loan. You become stressed and you turn into an illegal immigrant, which is a pandemic sort of problem in the European Union, particularly because the European Union brings in close to 20 million labor migrants per year officially. That does not account for all the students, all the people who crossed the border illegally or drove in to the EU. So the number is really close to 50 million number, and it's in disarray, right? So now your intentions were pure. You were living in your village. You were hoping for a brighter future. You did not want to become an immigrant. You wanted to go abroad, work, send money home. You improve the life of your family. And all of a sudden, you've been turned into an illegal immigrant running around Europe, maybe unfortunately forced to commit a crime because you need to pay back the loan, so you steal somebody's bike, and it's inefficient, it's very bad. There is abuse. Let's say that a woman from the Philippines, a story that I know, a woman from the Philippines pays somebody a lot of money in the Philippines to go work as a caregiver. She comes to Europe to work as a caregiver. She gets abused. She's afraid to complain. She's afraid to report. She thinks she's going to get fired, sent back home, and then who is going to pay back the loan? because the middleman already took the money. Joblio is a technology-powered social impact platform that is not just technology, because it's also the people behind the technology. And quite honestly, while this may not be the best comparison that I could come up with, but because Joblio deals with human lives, it's like the Amazon. So the Amazon is not only the technology, it's also tons of people who work there, you know, who load, unload, drive the packages, right? So there are humans. Similarly, Joblio is also staffed with humans who make sure that your user journey as the labor migrant involves us from the moment that you contact us to apply for a position abroad until you go back. Now, what Joblio does is Joblio rearranges, or rather cleans up the ecosystem. So let me just briefly talk about the ecosystem for a second. So the ecosystem is supposed to be composed of 4 participants. I'll just make comparative analysis real quick. So the first participant is the labor migrant who today suffers abuse, whose family today suffers abuse and misfortunes, who is cheated by these unscrupulous agents who take money from them and sell them grossly misrepresented at best or non-existent opportunities to work abroad at worst. So he suffers, the labor migrant. The second participant in the ecosystem is the employer. Now think about the employer. You need 10,000 people to come and pick your apples, or to work as carpenters, or to be painters or bus drivers. And all of a sudden, either they don't come in at all because maybe they got the visa and flew somewhere else, or they come in and they run away. So they come in and they run away. Now you don't have the staff, which affects your bottom line. It also affects your efficiency. It affects your compliance. You make a lot less money. Maybe you lose money. And also you are legally exposed to liabilities, because it's likely that you were not the one who processed the employee by yourself. And there is legal liability that comes from that. The third participant in the ecosystem is the government of the host country. That's the government that hosts the labor migrants. Instead of getting bona fide labor migrants who assist local economy today, it gets violations of human rights, illegal immigration, uptick in crime, and it loses tax dollars. It loses the money that it could otherwise generate by taxing employer-employee relationships. Because employees run away, there is nobody to tax. The fourth participant in the ecosystem is the government of the originating country. It's the government of India, China, Nepal, Kenya, Nigeria, okay, all of the developing countries. Look what happened with the Nepalese in Qatar. The problem wasn't really, while Qatar is getting a lot of bad press, the problem really originated in Nepal because the people got cheated. So now 60,000 or however many Nepalese workers got stuck in Qatar, no job, you know, horrible, horrible situation. So the government of the origination country, its citizens get abused abroad, but they're also not sending money back home regularly. And your gross domestic product largely depends on foreign remittances if you are an originating country. So the originating country is at a loss. So these 4 elements make up the ecosystem. However, unfortunately, as I had just described to you, there is also the 5th element, which is a parasite within the ecosystem, the middleman, who creates havoc and builds informational barriers between the worker and the employer. And what Joblio does is Joblio destroys that informational barrier by removing the middleman and creating transparency, and connecting employers and employees directly, allowing employers to select staff and test their skills and interview them directly. And it's free of charge for the worker. So the worker pays nothing. Why? Because Joblio gets paid by the corporate client in the developed world, our technology fee. So Joblio charges employers and not the employees a fee to work on Joblio platform. So which brings me to the following point. Thank God Almighty. Nothing is an accident, obviously, and I was in Jerusalem 2 months ago, where I had met with the leadership of the global evangelical movement, and we 1 month later had executed a strategic partnership agreement where Joblio not only became recognized by the global evangelical church for the humanitarian aspect of what we do, but Joblio was also recognized as an efficient element to help improve lives of various members of the evangelical community who live in the developing countries and who may fall victim to abuse. Obviously, the holiday of Tabernacle just finished, so happy holiday to everybody, and also I wish everybody a wonderful year ahead, 5,782. But the idea is that Joblio begins to educate religious leaders and men of faith, such as yourselves, so that you can spread the light on behalf of Joblio and turn into Joblio's ambassadors, where on a Sunday or whenever you meet with your congregation, that members of your congregations are prone and vulnerable today to abuse, and that members of your congregations, they live in societies with weak economies. So often they're forced to look for work outside of their countries, and they fall victims to misinformation disseminated by the so-called middleman. Now what we would like to do is we would like to develop first awareness, followed by an educational and training campaign where we train pastors on how to become Joblio's ambassadors, essentially educating people that Joblio exists. It takes literally 30 seconds to register on Joblio app, and then you're able to browse work for jobs internationally. We look forward to working with you on a one-on-one basis, so that you will develop comfort with regards to explaining to others on how to register, and hopefully moving forward even select groups and appoint leaders, and they will belong. We will be finding evangelical congregations in countries that they're going to. So the involvement of the evangelical church is going to be ongoing. So if you are in, I don't know, Indonesia, and you have a member of your congregation who is a evangelical, and maybe this person ends up working in Poland or in Romania or in Germany, then we will find the evangelical congregations locally so that he is not alone, or she, and so that he or she remains a member of the congregation, and he does not leave you, because importantly with Joblio, the worker does not become an immigrant, because he doesn't borrow anything anymore. He's got no loan. Basically, you know, he still has some just small out-of-pocket expenses, like take PCR exam, you know, the government requirements, you know, minor, okay? And then basically, because he's not paying any money, so he's living in your country now, and tomorrow he's in another country and he didn't pay anybody, except he makes 10, 20, 30 times more money that he's sending back home to his family, which importantly did not leave, because he's not an immigrant, he's a labor migrant. And then upon expiration of his authorized stay in the host country, he returns back to his family, albeit the family is now in a much more advantageous economic situation, and so is the community, and so is the evangelical church. So we create a win-win, and obviously we invite all of you to stand with Joblio in fighting the inequities that exist in this world, and creating the efficiencies that only Joblio is able to deliver to these communities. And I think on this note, I feel that although I've said a lot, I've explained what we do, and please feel free to ask us any questions. You're also welcome to contact Professor Abraham directly at any given time, or send us an email at contact@joblio.co. So please, whoever has any questions, we would love to answer them.
Yeah. Before we throw the floor open for questions, I just wanted to add, so you might be, as a pastor, as a servant of God, thinking, so what is in it for the church? So for every employee who gets selected by an employer, be it in Poland, Romania, or any other part of the world, he or she, that particular church, gets a certain percentage, okay? And we'd be more than happy and to share that percentage with the pastor, with the church. So the church also benefits in this process. So we have eliminated the middlemen, we have eliminated the rotten ecosystem in between, and we work as a direct bridge between the employee who is looking for a good, bright future to have a good family life later, and with the employer who's also desperately looking for legal workers. And in the process, Joblio benefits because Joblio, is a commercial enterprise at the end of the day, ethical commercial enterprise, but working with the company. So it's a company that pays. And a certain percentage of that will be happy to share with the church or the pastor or any ambassador who signs up with us gets a part of it, right? So that's the way the whole system works. We would be happy. I can also tell you, earlier we had a system of a master ambassador and then sub-ambassadors, but I'm glad to inform you that you can all be direct ambassadors, which means you don't need to, again, have this hierarchy. You directly get the benefits. I'd be more than happy to connect you. There is a half an hour to 1 hour training program on how to sensitize you as leaders and how you can share this message. We are going to have a series of such initiatives. So you're more than welcome to join us. And now I'll throw open the floor for any questions you might have, and we'd be more than happy to answer them. Anybody? Pastors? I've seen somebody from Nigeria. I have my good friend, Mr. Wilfred. I have Pastor Ruben Davis, Brother Majestic Pinky. I've got Brother Sam Joseph, who's associated with one of the largest churches in Dubai. Brother Lawrence Ambrose, Alfonso. Anybody, any questions? You can put it on chat. You can talk to us. You can unmute and speak. All of you have the privilege of unmuting and speaking, so please do that. Any questions?
Speaking is permitted to everyone right now, so just unmute yourself. And
yeah, just unmute and speak. That's it. Thank you, Esther. Pastor Ruben, anything that you wanted to ask?
Everything is clear. Everything is clear.
Everything is clear. Yes. Brother Sam, any questions? Samuel. Brother Wilfred, David, Nigeria. Nigeria is a very hot market, and I know you have a large network. Yeah, go ahead, brother, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Chris. Thank you very much, the presenter. That is, trying to remember the name now.
Mr. John. John.
Yeah, Mr. John, yes. Mr. John, yeah.
That's easy.
Yeah, Mr. John, yeah. That is so great. I found it a great privilege to be part of this movement, especially given a very profound privilege to the Christian community. That is lofty and that is rare, really, because the Christian community has always been part of every other person in the secular world trying to find his feet. But this is lovely. This is great. So I really appreciate that. I'm from Deeper Life Bible Church in Nigeria, and I'm also work with the youth youth in different categories. well, Professor Abraham is a very great friend, a great inspiration also, to work here in Nigeria. Okay, so I just want to ask, are there specific, I tried to register on, I've not really registered on Joblio, but I've downloaded the app, of course. I've not registered. I just want to ask, would there be specific requirements? I want to believe all of those metrics should be there. I'm just asking for different categories of job, and then also are there time frame for these processes, so that, of course, just as this is an opportunity for Christian and other life faith based individual, I also believe you also want to get competent people at the same time. So are there metrics, involved and other stuff?
Excellent question. John, would you like to take that? Before
Yes.
John takes it, what we are planning, Ms. Esther would send you a set of materials, which will also include, since I've got your web, WhatsApp numbers, I can also send you a set of materials. Most specifically, he spoke about Poland. It was not simply a stray, a statement he made. There are actually literally tens of thousands of jobs. I'm repeating, tens of thousands of jobs which are available for people across, especially in Poland, immediate. Now, from the metric part of how we are going to find out who is good, I would give it to John, who can tell you more details. John, the testing and all that.
Yes, sir. Thank you for asking that. Thank you for asking that question. What we would like to, this question has two parts to it. So first is, how is the recruitment and registration conducted? And second, how do you test skills so that you can better match workers with employers? So what I wanted to say is that we would like for as many people as possible, even if it's in the millions, to register on the app, because it's free and it takes 30 seconds. And you can apply, you can browse jobs and you can apply. Then what we do is we look at the pool of all the people who came to register kind of from up top, and we're analyzing data. And then when we analyze data, then we become better positioned to match employers with employees. So, and I'll give you an example. For instance, take two countries. Take Poland, that Professor Abraham just mentioned, and take Italy. Poland, so and it's many labor migrants will not get this, but most certainly you will. So all of these trends are dictated by global socio-economic and geopolitical and geoeconomic trends. So for instance, if you take Poland, Poland became a member of the European Union and the Schengen zone later than other countries in Europe. So if you are a Polish carpenter and you live in Western Poland, where you are maybe a 20-minute drive from Germany, what happens is you work in Germany because you make more money, okay? And this is why there is a vacuum in Poland of skilled professions with rather rigorous expectations of professional skill sets. However, look at Italy. Italy is its demand for labor migrants is up a staggering 40% from March of 2020, and there is a shortage of 1 million caregivers also, I believe, in Italy. Caregivers are have lower skills than a welder, right? So, which brings me back to the point of the data analysis. Once we see, so let's say that you are in your church, and I'm living in the future now where everybody is properly trained and all, and now you're able to spread the message within your congregation. And then let's say that on Sunday or within 2 weeks, you've got 100 people who've registered. Now, our head of ambassadors, who is with us here, Esther Katz, starts working with you, and our department begin working with you to analyze data. And then we see, okay, so maybe because there are a lot of young people who have no skills who are coming to you, maybe the best thing to do for this particular community will be to relocate them as seasonal, temporary agricultural staff to Spain or to Poland, while all of a sudden, maybe Pastor Samuel Joseph, who is in Dubai, has on a Sunday 20 people who come into his church, and they are all professional masons, and maybe they are from somewhere in Southeast Asia, but they're only making $500 a month because they're in Dubai, and perhaps now they have an opportunity to move up further up socially by going to work as professional, welders or, masons or whatever I said in Poland. So it comes with analysis of data. So was I able to answer your question, or was I too vague?
No, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah, let me give you a little more specific. Let's say we are looking at a welder. Now, you would have a welder on paper. You may have a welder who has no paper but has tons of experience. So how do we distinguish? So when, let's say, for example, there are 10 welders who are required in Poland, Joblio will ensure that somebody from Joblio, representative from Joblio, actually tests the guy with the paper who actually has a paper that says he's a qualified welder, and a guy who has no paper. Two of them will be given a welding test, and whoever qualifies then gets it. What again, Mr. John, probably did not tell you is that, let's say he's going to Poland. Poland is not going to speak English or any common language. They may speak Polish. So we would give them a sensitivity training on the Polish language. We don't want to make them a Polish expert, but they will know basics about food, cash, money, bank, hotel, whatever, all those basics that they need to survive in that environment. So there's a lot of thinking that goes behind it. What he also did not mention, and which is one of the most interesting things that appealed to me personally, was, let's say a company, puts up a contract. It says, every month we're going to pay you 1,000 euros, and we will give you an accommodation which is shared with another person. We'll also take care of your medical or health insurance. There are 3 conditions being made. Many of you would be aware that in many cases, companies do not fulfill what's written on the contract. They have all kinds of shady ways to beat the system. Joblio will not only get this person a job and ensure that he or she is getting there without paying anything, but Joblio would also take it as their ethical responsibility to ensure that the 1,000 euros promised every month was paid to the employee, number one. Number two, he or she gets to share that room with that other person, and he or she who was promised the medical insurance is also given medical insurance. I'm just giving these as examples. It could be 10 other things that are put in the employment contract, and Joblio takes it as its ethical responsibility to do it. No agent does this on the planet. I don't know of any agent who does this. He or she would at best probably get you a job and then collect a fat cat fee from the unfortunate employee, nothing beyond that. But I think this is where the human dimension comes in, and this is why it is so special.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions? Lovely. If there are no more questions, we'll still be in touch. I know all of you, so I would ensure that we know through our pastors network and, through a larger network. We plan to do this more often. So certainly we'll look at interacting with you, and we want each and every one of you to become an ambassador. For you, there's no monetary commitments. You don't shell out a single, fill or rupee or dollar, whichever country you come from, or naira. But at the same time, you become our partner, and you in the process is making your community a better community. And in the process, you make the world a better place, free of all these rotten elements who mess up the system. So I think it's a great call for all of us, a great opportunity to make a difference. So we want you to partner. Yeah, anytime, feel free to write to me, to write to Pastor Ruben, anybody, you know, we're all connected and we'd be more than happy to guide you.
And also, what we'd like to do is we would like to be able to pre-schedule a one-on-one calls,
Yes.
so that we can train you. We will execute a revenue share agreement, as
Exactly.
Professor Abraham said, which basically means that when Joblio gets paid by the employers once a month, and then when Joblio gets paid, Joblio pays to you. So a percentage of our top line revenue, and you're free to use that money, you know, in whichever way you choose. So I guess the next step would be to schedule the one-on-one calls, and we will execute ambassadorship agreements so that you could formally announce yourself as Joblio ambassador, and we will certainly announce you as the ambassador on social media, and together we will come up with the messaging that will be perfectly suited for your community wherever you are, and you know, let's go change the world together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all of you for taking time off to be with us. And as I said, we are you know, in constant contact. So feel free to write to me, to any of the pastors, or to John, to that contact at Joblio. You're more than welcome, and we're very, very happy to assist you. Thank you once again, and God bless all of you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.